see green. I can see my graph now. Really exciting. I get the wonderful opportunity to welcome all of you here today. I just think this is such a fantastic turnout. I think it relates to the fact that we all know how important this topic of permanent supportive housing is to our community. And we have a few minutes to do welcome and introductions. I'm also going to take the opportunity to do a little bit of level setting so that we're all on the same plane, we're all on the same page, and we're all headed in the same direction. So we're going to get right into it because we have some really exciting presenters today. We have Rob McCann, who's come down from Spokane. We have Rhonda Huff, who's come in from Yakima. Patrick Jones will be here shortly. He's our economist. He's here as I speak. So we have a lot on our agenda. We have a presentation from Amerigroup, who will be talking about supportive housing and how to get reimbursed for services. There's just so much content that we thought we should provide you with a little bit of food so that you could energize and really put those minds to work as we're thinking about how do we address this problem of supporting housing together. So why a summit? We'll go to my PowerPoint slide. So thanks to the internet, it's easy to find out what these words actually mean. And I think in this case, besides the definition of the summit being the top of a hill or mountain or the highest level of attainment, I think the last definition really resonated with me. And that a summit can be used to describe a gathering of people who care deeply about the same topic. And that's why I'm so excited to see all of you here, is that I think we all care deeply about the needs of our community members and an unmet need that we have in this community for permanent supportive housing. And as far as I know, I think this is the first time all of us have met together on this important topic, so I think we're all on the same track. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why Greater Columbia ACH is involved in this effort, and really we are trying to transform the healthcare delivery system of our region. And so what do I mean by healthcare delivery system? It's really all of those different sectors and organizations that relate or have anything to do with a person's health. I know that housing is one of the most important supportive services that people can have. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need shelter, you need food. And so our focus areas then that as part of the Healthier Washington Transformation Initiative is we have these three strategies focusing on whole person health, rewarding value over volume, that today is about empowering local communities. Right. So Greater Columbia ACH is one of 9 accountable communities of health across the state of Washington. I like to refer to it as Big Blue because we cover the biggest region. We span 9 counties, including the Yakima Nation. And so it is our desire then to help our communities really focus in on investments that will help transform the delivery system. And the way that we do this is through our partnerships. And you can see on the right-hand side some of our partner agencies, their counties, their local government, their philanthropy, their transportation, their social services. We have 17 sectors represented on our board of directors, and this relates to a method of problem solving called collective impact. Oh, and again, our vision. Our vision is that all individuals, regardless of their circumstances, have the opportunity to achieve their highest potential. And that's kind of hard when you're talking about the homeless, right? It's hard to imagine somebody that could achieve their highest potential when they're living on the street. But this is our vision. It's our vision and our desire for our community. So Greater Columbia ACH has really a couple of major investments areas. So the way that we are funded, like all the other ACHs, is that we are contracted with the Healthcare Authority. We earn incentive payments based on performance, based on reporting, and based on our provider performance. So we have like 2 major investment areas. One is in what's called patient-centered medical homes. And in layman's terms, what that means is we're trying to get our providers ready for value-based payment. This is a new Medicaid payment methodology, We're trying to help them increase their capacity. We're trying to help them learn how to manage populations. That's done under the work of our practice transformation team. And in a bit, we will go around and we will introduce ourselves. But we have a department that is dedicated to that. And so inside that health system, healthcare organization, you'll see things like decision support and clinical information systems, delivery system design. Those are all big words for we're trying to make our practices more efficient and provide whole person care. But the reason that we're all here today is that what Greater Columbia tries to do is to branch out this collective impact model and extend it to other forums such as this. Collective impact is it's a way of solving complex problems. It's not just enough to gather a group of people together to talk about, what the problems are and the issues are. Collective impact really reaches across a broad spectrum of organizations. So you were invited here by invitation, and we might be missing people. And that's part of collective impact, is to make sure that we're including all the sectors that really need to be involved in order to solve a very complicated problem. And our complicated problem is homelessness. And so we're going to hear from people today, from experts that have solved this problem in that community. And collective impact really isn't just as simple as it sounds like getting people together, but we all come together, we have a shared agenda. And I hope our agenda today is helping look at homelessness and what we can do to resolve it. We have to come up with some shared measures. So at the end of the day, what are we going to measure? How do we know that we are going to be successful, right? We have to have mutually reinforcing activities so that what the fire department does and what the hospitals do and what our social services do, they have to complement each other in a very organized fashion, because that's what it takes. These issues are very complex. You can't just have one silver bullet. You have to have multiple ways of attacking the problem. You have to continuously communicate. So now that you're on our email list, you will be hearing more from us. You will be hearing more from us about how to get involved and what's coming up and how to take the next step. And then finally, Greater Columbia ACH in this case is acting as the backbone organization. And that's required because there's a lot that has to go on just to conduct a meeting like this. There was a lot of pre-work, a lot of meeting structure that had to be attended to. And so it really helps to have a backbone organization. And actually, Greater Columbia was asked to lead the charge on this particular topic. And so that's why we stepped forward. We also know that health is much more than healthcare. And we all recognize that social services is a big part of our healthcare delivery system. Our physical environment is part of it, our health behaviors are part of it, but really where we live, how we work, how we get paid, our environment has so much more to do with what affects our health. So we really look at this as being a major part of the healthcare delivery system and how we're going to transform healthcare. So we are making investments. Greater Columbia is making investments in a series of social determinants of health that are working with what we call our local health improvement network. In this case, it's the Benton Franklin Community Health Alliance, and making targeted investments across the spectrum of social determinants. So today is our day to talk about housing, and not only that, supportive housing. So what do I mean by supportive housing? Well, I'm hoping that all you can help me define this, but what we put on our flyers was that supportive housing is affordable housing with on-site services that help formally homeless, disabled tenants live in dignity in the community. Do I need to add anything else to that definition of supportive housing? You guys are the experts, not me. So I want to you. Where's Barbara? Yeah, Barbara. Did you get it right? Got it right. Okay. Does everybody agree that that's what supportive housing means? That what it means to you, Abby? Where's Abby? Okay. All right, good, because I want us to be all on the same page before we take the next step. So our objective today is to learn learn about what is supportive housing, what is collective impact, why are we using this model of problem solving. We're going to learn about the state of homelessness in Benton and Franklin counties by our economist, Dr. Patrick Jones, who happens to be Greater Columbia ACH's fearless facilitator. We're going to learn about these other initiatives in Yakima and Spokane that have been successful in placing people in supportive housing. And then the last step is the call to action. Because we know we can't do this alone. We know this is necessary in our community. How do we support each other in getting to take those next steps? We have to be the voice that is the advocate for our homeless in our community. So those will be our calls to action. So I'm going to ask now everybody to say your name and the organization that you're with so we can make sure and you can hear the various sectors that are represented today. And if we think that there are people that are missing, we will circle back and we will invite them in. So I've already introduced myself. I'm Cheryl Moser with Greater Columbia ACH, and I think we'll start from this side of the room and we'll go by tables and circle back. And we will pass the microphone around. That's a great suggestion.
Byron Talbot with Elijah County Homes. Ryan Washington with Elijah County Homes. I'm William Waters. I'm the Director of Comprehensive Healthcare here in Tri-City.
And Alex Young with the Windsor Family Home CPAP program. I'm Lisa Lawrence with the Merit Group, the TPA for the Foundational Community Support. Third party administrator for the Foundational Community Support Program.
I like it when you get corrected with the acronyms. I have a lot of fun this first year trying to learn all your acronyms. Thank you very much. I'm Sherry with Merit Group, and I'm the Community Relations Rep for the Greater Columbia area.
Kowalski Snipes with Ansel, a New Start in Life, Housing Homeless Youth.
I'm Corey Wakely with Catholic. Erin Manning Gray with Catholic.
Bill Dunleavy with Catholic.
Joyce Newsom with People for People 211.
I'm Rhonda Haas of Yakima Neighborhood Health Services and Chair of the Greater Columbia ACH.
Pat Levay, Director of Health and Innovation at Community Health Plan of Washington.
Mark Hollingsworth with Hope Source out of Kitsap County.
Nancy Metcalf from Field Services for Veteran Families, Benton and Franklin County.
Diana Young, Supportive Housing Director, PAC.
Sean McCann, CEO of Catholic Charities, Eastern Washington.
Ginger Brisson, their return studies. Abby Corrigan, Home Advocate, also on board with and Starlight.
Luca Matters, Executive Director with Communities and Schools at Benton Franklin.
Rita Thomas with Community and Schools at Benton Franklin.
Heidi Cryer, Board of Life Lutheran Church.
Tracy Dillon, Psychiatric Nurse, Lawrence Counseling Center.
Karen Single, Coordinated Care. Cindy Bressler, Grace Clinic. Christina Rodriguez, Tri-Cities Community Health. Christian Stacy, Oxford Health Incorporated.
Jason Bliss, State Coordinator for Oxford House Incorporated. Kirk Williamson, Benton Franklin Community Health Alliance.
Jonathan Migalski, Benton Franklin Health District.
Raquel Farrell Crowley for the Office of the United States Senator Patty Murray.
And I'm Pam Pruitt with the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Tri-Cities.
Andy Seidel, Community Relations, Greater Columbia, Coordinated Care.
Mark Walkeye from the St. Joseph Health, Luke's Catholic.
Joel Chavez, I'm the Integrated Managed Care Regional Manager for CHPW.
Gloria Popple, Benton Franklin Human Services. Murray Carpet, and Franklin County Community Services.
Kyle Sullivan with the
Your assignment's been for your effort.
Chairman Portnoy, Outpatient Manager for Lloyd's.
Dana Otis, the Lord.
Mark President, Needham, CEO.
Hi, Barbara Lee, the Lord. Carolyn, City of Kennewick, CDBG. Shelburne, City of Richland. Andrew Whitman, City of Pasco, Los Angeles Administrator.
Chris Guerrero, Kenwood Police Department.
Angela Prashant, City of Pasco.
Metzger Police Chief, City of Pasco. Ben Majetta, Washington Police Department. Bob Deere, Pasco Fire Chief.
Kathy Jones, Executive Director of the Housing Authority of the City of Pasco and Franklin County. Kathleen Donaldson, Captain Tracy, serving Central Washington. Mia Dickinson, Fire Advocate, Consistent Care. Erica McKelvey, Registered Nurse, Consistent Care. Becky Gross, Consistent Care. Tony Zappa, Consistent Care.
Dan Asturi, Domestic Violence Services, Benton County.
Sammy Hammond, also with Domestic Violence Services. Virginia Jamie with Aging and Long-Term Care.
Adam, City of Pasco.
Jeff Alday from the Auction.
Here we go, with ideal balance.
Brian Ketchum, Director of Catholic Charities Housing Services, serving Central Washington.
Kendra Montemaris, this is the first time for that name. I just changed with you. Director of Healthcare Transformation, Catholic Charities, serving Central Washington.
Mona Hammer, Housing Authority, City of Kennewick.
I'm Lauren News with United Way. Welcome to our place. And I gave you some information on the census. There's a really quick 4-question survey on the back. You can tear that off and put it back on the name tag. That will help our community increase the count, which influences funding for housing.
Martin Patrick, one of the Active Transportation Managers with Greater Columbia Kids.
Diane Moore with Greater Columbia APH. I'm the project manager for the opioid resource strategy. Tim Wardell, Greater Columbia.
That's yours, the Pasco Fire Department.
Michelle Garland, City of Pasco Fire Department.
That's your Steve Mallory, owner of Archelaus and president of the Lions of Toyota for Sustainable Inc. Rebecca Altek, the leader and fire protection specialist for Greater Columbia ACH.
And Becky Coleman, the Director of Contracts and Finance for Greater Columbia ACH. I'm Rachel Gadd. I'm the Finance and Contracts Coordinator for Greater Columbia ACH.
I'm Patrick Jones, Eastern Washington University's Public Policy Institute. And I'm Wes Lucky, I'm the Deputy Director for the Greater Columbia.
We have two other GCAC employees.
I'm Lauren Thompson. I'm the Communication and Administrative Coordinator at Greater Columbia ACH. Jim Shelton, Practice Transportation Navigator, Greater Columbia ACH.
I think we got everybody, and we are going to move right into the next presentation. And so, in order to get our arms around the magnitude of this problem, I asked Patrick Jones, who's an economist, to take a look at the data. It's always good. The data is the oxygen that creates good public policy. So we are going to start with Patrick's data.
Perfect.
Yeah. Could you bring up the next second? Well, hello, everybody. I'm sorry I came a little late. I wasn't able to shake your hands. I don't have the excuse like I did a week ago where I was traveling about 2 hours from my house, about 4 or 5 inches. So it looks like that, those of you in this part of the world were spared either. I've never seen a Tri-Cities look so white. So I got to ask, how many people have put their snow shovels away? Whoa, a few people haven't. when I was coming up Columbia Boulevard, I saw a farmer ranch saying, snow blowers still on sale. So maybe winter isn't yet beyond us. This year, of course, I hope there's a little bit of snow in the mountains for the next 2-3 weeks. But it's a pleasure to come down to share with you what I have learned recently. Carol gave me actually a pretty tough assignment. It says, tell the group in 20 minutes or less everything we can summarize about homelessness and the best practice research. And so I said, okay, Carol, I might need a little more than that, especially since I'm going to show you a little bit of numbers about homelessness in the Tri-Cities so we can measure them. So I've got about 25 slides that I want to just review with you. And I was so fortunate as I started this to find a recent survey by the National Academy of Sciences and Engineering, believe it or not, on homelessness. And so I'm going to share a lot of the findings from that particular review with you. So just get this teed up if you wouldn't mind. If we can go to housing down here. For those of you who don't know, this is Ben Franklin Trim's a project that has been co-developed by my unit at Eastern in conjunction with a lot of people down here. We'll just click on that and have it ready if you wouldn't mind. I'm gonna go back to that in just a second. But let's go to the PowerPoint if we could. And I can advance it myself, right?
Yes.
All right. So what we're going to do today is, oops, I went way too fast here, is do a very quick look at the data on homelessness in the 2 counties, and then review, as I said, largely on the basis of this National Academy of Sciences report on a segment of the homeless population. I want to emphasize that segment. Just from your introductions, I obviously saw that there are people here dealing with other segments of the homeless population that I'm not going to talk about today. So what I will focus on are the chronically homeless, and then I will focus on the program that I was, I think, asked to investigate, which was permanent supported housing, or just going to abbreviate that as PSH. And then I'm going to give you a case study to wrap up with that recently was completed in the Los Angeles County area. Sure. Okay, so we have various ways of measuring homeless, and the point-in-time count is one I'm going to show you here in a sec. We do have a couple other counts that came courtesy of the Kidder-Matthews report, which I think, Rob, you may be talking about a little bit, that has been done for Catholic Charities. And those, there are 2 different measures here. One is a snapshot of homelessness, which, as I think everybody in the room realizes, that the point-in-time count is done in January. This is also a January count, the snapshot. And then, of course, we have our numbers from the Homelessness Management Information System, or HMIS, which is an annual average, more or less. I'm not going to focus on student homelessness, which is a very large factor in most communities. And if you were to look at the trend site, we have a separate, discrete indicator on homelessness and students, and there the trend is going the wrong way. But before I continue with the slides here, could you go back to the website and we'll just look at the point-in-time count. Okay, so the point-in-time count basically would indicate that Tri-Cities is doing pretty well. Tri-Cities in total are the blue bars, and the rate of homelessness is in the yellow line, and the rate of homelessness for the state is in the green line. So you see there's been some progress here, but that's not the whole story. And I'll just want to have you keep this in mind. This is the point-in-time count with all its advantages and disadvantages. Quick comment for everybody who's been out there taking this count over the years. I imagine there's a few people in the room. Any comments on this? Are you surprised? This is what is reported to Housing and Urban Development, which is the funder. Yes.
Can you tell us how many people we're actually counting?
How many people are actually counted? If you mouse over, we don't have the 2019 numbers in yet, but could you mouse over? There you go. So 83 were sheltered and 45 were unsheltered.
But I mean, were there people that actually went out and found homeless, like under, you know?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I know Carol went out.
In 2018, there was about 30 people that were there on that one day, and we split up among various locations. Some people took Richland, some people took Kennewick, and various areas. And
Right.
we, first of all, did some brainstorming. Where would we find these homeless people, potentially? And then went from location to location to location, and basically tried to identify as many people as possible.
Right.
And it does open your eyes to.
Yeah.
You have to get their you know,
Consent?
consent, yeah. So I was wondering.
I don't know. For those of you who've taken it, is the consent
I
necessary?
mean, you can count an individual, but you need, in order to get the information, obviously, you need to have them provide. You want to fill out a form as to who they are, some of the demographics about them, and why are they homeless, circumstances.
Right. And we'll get into some of that detail in a sec. So that's good. That's good information beyond the count. Yes.
Just a quick question, 45 unsheltered or the 83, is that families or individuals?
Individuals.
So they do count if the family is already
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a family count coming up, or a household count that's coming up. I'll share with you. That's a little bit. So that's the point right now. So by that measure, the Tri-Cities is doing great. Don't know if that's the whole story though. So why don't we go back to the PowerPoint, Lauren? Okay, so let's define our terms a little bit. What do we mean by the chronically homeless? Well, here's the definition that almost everybody uses. You have to have been homeless, continuously homeless, with an emphasis on continuously, for a year, or over the past 3 years have experienced 4 bouts of homelessness. If we use that definition and apply it to the Tri-Cities, what percentage of all homeless are chronic? And this is from the Kidder-Matthew report. In 2018, it was about a quarter, 26%, which was higher than the 5-year average. So there is certainly a part of Benton Franklin County's homelessness that are chronically homeless. Now, we don't have the characteristics specifically for the Tri-Cities about who are the homeless. That's something I hope we can get over time. So I'm going to lean on something that came out of King County, Seattle, from their 2018 point in time count. And this more or less lines up with what we've seen with descriptors of homelessness in other areas, such as the case study I'm going to share with you. So overwhelmingly male, very few with children, mostly unsheltered, and importantly here for the Greater Columbia ACH, many with conditions that are pretty prevalent. In this case, 63% for both substance abuse and psychiatric emotional conditions. So that's King County. My guess is we're not that different in the Tri-Cities. That's who's there. Now there's another measure of homelessness, and this is looking at the living situation of the Benton and the 2 counties' homeless households. So this is household data that what they were like before they entered the social service networks and the HMIS for a particular year, in this case 2017 and 2018. And you can see there's a total of 982, almost 1,000 households. Households could be 1, 2, 3, 4. My guess is the average here is about 3. And you can see that of those households, 134 were sheltered. These are transitory sheltered, and 248 were unsheltered. About half of these, the largest category here are people who actually had their own dwelling, and they found themselves homeless as households going into the social service networks. And then we have a measure of the homeless. This is not chronically homeless. This is just homeless who have found permanent supported housing. And you can see it's pretty low here in the Tri-Cities, 61, 3%. That's a per capita measure. These are household measures. Did I skip a slide? There we go. Okay. A third measure is something from the January count, and this is looking at another slice of this population. There's two categories: the unstably housed, which could include, by the way, homeless students, couch surfing under a roof. It could include families that are unstably housed. But importantly for us, we're looking at the literally homeless. So these are folks who are either sheltered in emergency shelters or living on the streets. The estimate that we have from this snapshot of homelessness, which comes from the state, for 2017, which is the latest one we have for Ben Franklin, is that they amounted to 845, which is about a quarter, and this is per capita, a quarter of the 33 or 3,400 folks who were homeless. Okay. Again, though, we don't know how many fit the definition of chronically homeless, because these could be people just in transit to something better. Chronically homeless is definitely the challenged population where they've been in that situation for quite a while. Okay, so that's very once over lightly on the data, and I don't know if Rob's going to talk a little bit more about that, but we might share the information we have from the report that was commissioned by him. Here's the conclusion from the Peter Matthews report for the Tri-Cities. The conservative point-in-time count and anecdotal evidence suggest a chronically homeless population of at least 30 individuals in any given year. And to wrap up, the consultant concludes by saying, assuming that there is a 50-unit prototype, it is my opinion that the baseline homeless demand, with a preference and priority for the chronically homeless, is deep enough to support the development. So there's the punchline. Quick questions before I go on to looking at how we should evaluate what we're doing in dealing with the homeless. Okay. As I said, these were my main two sources. This is a little picture of the cover of the book from the National Academy of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine, Permanent Supportive Housing. And this is the recent report from the RAND Corporation. RAND is a wonderful think tank out of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, actually, that's been around for certainly since the 1960s, if not before. Okay, so here's the little bit of backdrop of the National Academy Review. It was headed, as it always is, by a committee, this time mostly academics, not all. And this person from the University of California, Davis Institute of Population Health Improvement was the chair. 300 studies were part of their assignment, or they found 300 studies to review. And then besides sort of summarizing what we know to date, they also spent a bit of time saying, well, we don't know, and therefore we're going to make recommendations. And this study was completed in 2018. The case study I'm going to show you is from, as I said, LA, and it looks at the changes in outcomes of the chronically homeless over a 24-month period, 12 months before they entered into PSH and 12 months afterwards. What is the delta? What's the change? They were able to get data on almost 900 folks in LA over a period of time between 2010 and 2016. And they have an advantage, which probably most communities don't have up here, is that they have an integrated data system at the county level that is able to crosswalk and identify each homeless person in each service a provider agency that gives aid. Okay, so what do we mean by permanently supported housing? Two components. It's, instead of saying permanent, you can also say non-time limited. So it doesn't have an end date once you get into an apartment. And number two, it has an array of voluntary, and that's interesting, we might have an interesting conversation about the service delivery, voluntary supported services. And what are those supported services? Well, it's actually a long list. And I've just summarized what I think are some of the more important ones here. Client outreach and engagement, case management, a medical home, which is something you may have heard about before, covering physical health, mental health, substance abuse disorders, assistance with life skills, employment preparation, and more. So that's, I think, pretty standard definition of permanent supported housing. So here were the questions that the National Academy wanted to look at. Number one, does this approach keep people stably housed? Stably housed. Number two, does it reduce cost? And in particular, people are interested in how much it reduces. So do the cost savings actually cover the cost of the amounts of the programs that underlie permanent supported housing? And then, lest we forget what this is all about, does it really influence and improve people's health? So those are the three questions, and I'm just going to share with you the conclusions. You don't want to hear three studies. Oh, before I do, a little bit about methods, and I have to say this. I have to bore you with a little bit about methodology in social sciences because it does play a role in the conclusions that the National Academy has come up with. There's three different approaches, largely, that they reviewed. Number one is the classic random controlled trial, which we may know from drug trials, right? Does this approach work better than either the status quo or no treatment? And the assignment into what group you're in is random. And from a perspective of trying to show cause, linking X to Y or Y to X, this is the gold standard. The next is something called quasi-experimental, where one tries to create, through a pretty elaborate statistical methods, a control group, but it's not random. And then finally, which is the attack the RAND study took, there's a pre and post analysis, like we just said, 12 months before, 12 months after, and no randomness here, it's just using administrative records. Okay, question number one, stably housed. Here's what the National Academy said. Based on studies conducted over a 1 to 2 year period, permanent supported housing effectively maintains housing stability for most people. Okay, so thumbs up on that one. Question though is, what's beyond 12 months? And just one of the problems of doing research in this area, it's costly to extend the length of a study. So there's not a lot out there just looking at a 5 year period, for example. Okay, health outcomes. This might be a surprise. Overall, with the exception of a population with AIDS, the committee finds that there is no substantial evidence as yet that permanent supported housing improves health outcomes. And this was a finding I think this group did not anticipate. Because then they continue to write, while this was an inescapable finding, the committee believes that housing in general improves health and notes that permanent supported housing is important in increasing the ability of some individuals to become and remain housed. Okay, so by the gold standard, which is largely random controlled trials, this is what they come up with. Now, there's other results for less rigorous approaches. And then finally, costs. And you can see here, there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the PSH model saves healthcare costs or is cost effective. Why? Because we in the research community just haven't been able to put together enough studies that would show this. And it's very difficult to do this. But they caveat that with saying permanent supported housing was designed to prevent and end chronic homelessness and not save costs. So that's a kind of a societal or a community decision. You're going to have to ask ourselves, I mean, how much cost savings is good enough? And finally, the committee doesn't believe that policymakers should expect that permanent supported housing would yield net cost savings, although, and this is what we're going to get into at the end, some cost savings could be identified in specific studies, such as those that focus on people who are persistently high utilizers of emergency medical services. So keep that in mind, because I think this is what the Greater Columbia ACH has been talking about, is dealing with this population. Now, this is sort of the one operational slide I'll just share with you. They spent a lot of time looking at program design, and two elements of program design is where do people live and what kind of services. And so there's two options in placing folks, which Rob may talk about. You have scattered site and single site. And basically, they come up to the conclusion that there's comparable effects in housing stability for either approach, but that's as much as we can say, or the literature allows us to say at the moment about other outcomes like health and saving costs. And then this whole notion of services. What do we mean by services? What counts? And it varies a lot, if not entirely, by study and by community. So there is no agreement on what the best supported services models are among the different groups of individuals. All right, so not maybe what some of us expected, including myself when I was reading this, before I started reading this book. But I think it's good to know this is the lay of the land as best as we can determine it through fairly rigorous social scientific principles. So let's look at a case study. And this case study comes up actually different conclusions, but it's not a random controlled trial. It's the third approach, which is a pre and post using administrative data. Mean age, 52 years, a little bit different than King County. Males were 65% of the population. Race and ethnicity. By the way, LA has the largest single population of homelessness in the United States right now. So this is a big deal in LA County. You can just read that off. Preponderance of African Americans, followed by Latinos, followed by whites, followed by all others. And not quite all chronically homeless, but most, 83%. And the homelessness has almost been 3 years. So that is their sort of profile. Okay, and a profile on health is that about a third have physical disabilities, but many, many more have behavioral health conditions. You can see that right there. Serious mental illness, non-serious mental illness, and substance abuse, and then some selected physical health conditions. And I'm not a physician, so I'm not exactly sure what musculoskeletal is. Anybody know?
Back pain, probably.
Back pain, joint pain, yeah. Okay. And then, importantly here, co-occurring conditions. Almost everybody has co-occurring conditions. Okay, so let's cut to the results. This is looking at service utilization due to 1 year of applying permanent supported housing, and just looking at a few of the outcomes that we care most about as we evaluate studies or we evaluate efforts. emergency room visits, inpatient stays, frequency of days of inpatient stays, frequency of outpatient visits, and frequency of behavioral health outpatient visits. One would hope that the effect is negative, that, in other words, that because of permanent supported housing, these things have gone down, and then look, there's a negative or a minus sign in front of all of these. Percentages are pretty high. Look at that, 80% reduction in emergency room visits. Statistically, these have been, by the way, these have been controlled for what we call covariates or individual characteristics like race, ethnicity, age, things like that for all the people who were a part of this. That was close to 900. So these are very strong results. Very strong results. What I didn't put there, but also showed reductions were inpatient days for behavioral health and frequency of crisis stabilization service. So two activities that are certainly very important, I know, from my work in the Greater Columbia ACH. However, they were not statistically significant. These four were, and highly so. So kind of what we thought, most of us, I think, have this presumption of what will happen. This is looking at total cost for the 890 folks who are involved before and after permanent supported housing in LA County. And you can see that for both inpatient and emergency room use, those total costs went down significantly. And they have those little asterisks, which means statistically, we can make that claim as well. Behavioral health outpatient, that should be days, went down by a quarter. This is kind of a special subsidy that's LA specific. This jail time was an anomaly that the RAND researchers spent quite a lot of time talking about because it's the one place that didn't go down, jail time. And this is the problem of looking at averages. Apparently there were, first of all, some folks in the system who spent a long time in jail. So that changed the average. Also, the California law changed. So I don't know what to make of this, and I don't think the RAND research team really knows what to make of it either. Probation costs, probation management costs went down as well. So kind of what I think most of us think would happen with supported housing happened in LA. So for those of you who really pay attention to the bottom line, who are accountants by nature, like me, here's what the changes to the sort of the program costs were like that I've just summarized here in millions of dollars. So total services before this started for these 890 individuals were about 34 million. Afterwards, the services dropped to 13, 14 million. Pretty big savings. Savings of over $20 million. Then you have to fold in the cost of the services, right, to house these people. And that was over 13 million. And so total net savings was almost 7 million for 1 year for 890 people. Or we can also say these outlays declined by about 20%, a little over $7,500 per year. So that's a pretty strong result, I would say. What about their health? Well, they didn't do a survey of 890 people. That's pretty expensive. So what they did survey is just a subset of that. You see here, the number is 83. They used a survey tool called Quality Metrics SF12. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's fairly widely used for individuals assessing his or her own health. And it's measuring physical and mental health. Average is about 50. And here's what happened after 12 months of permanent supported housing. Very little change in physical health, but mental health went up, and that was statistically significant. So I think that sort of conforms to our expectations. The sample's small here, so it's really hard to generalize, but not a bad result. Okay, so here's what RAND said at the end of their work. We've enrolled, the program has enrolled large numbers of individuals and kept them in housing for a year while reducing utilization of care. The findings suggest that, and this is housing for health, by the way, this is their approach to it. Housing for health, PSH could save money, but there are these limitations, both of the methods and the fact that it's really hard, and this is where we get into this idea of how do we actually keep track of everything? Because there's so many agencies, there's so many part of our communities that touch the homeless, right? They only measured 6 county departments. There are probably as many more, and they just couldn't get their arms around that. So we have to be very careful statistically and just methodologically that we see that permanent supportive housing seems to have done this, but since this is not a causal study, we can't say that these changes are solely attributable to the program. So that's part of the challenge. Oops. So let me just wrap up with looking at sort of the big picture data from the National Academy. And so the recommendations from the National Academy for looking at health outcomes. What should we expect? How should we improve it? We believe, I find this interesting, not think, we believe that stable housing has an especially important impact on care with certain conditions. And they're calling these conditions housing sensitive conditions. So I'd like to, all of us, put our thinking cap on and say, what are those housing sensitive conditions that are most amenable to improvement if the Tri-Cities were to go down this path? The example they use is HIV/AIDS. Apparently the HIV/AIDS population of subpopulation of homelessness had statistically valid changes in their health outcomes. Okay, for cost outcomes, it's a little different story. We need a lot more, in the research community and as a society, we need to do more and better research before we come up with any conclusions that are broad. I just would like to leave you with this, though, from the Academy. Although the evidence is not strong, it suggests that PSH is cost-effective for those with persistent patterns of homelessness and serious mental illness. Okay, so I think you can probably bank on that one. Now, what does RAND leave us with in terms of their work? Well, I think it's really important that there be an integrated data system for anybody to assess, whether it's an academic like myself or whether it's all of you in the room, to see are we moving the needle. Without that, we're just shooting in the dark and probably just expressing our biases. So I would hope that if we do something in the Tri-Cities, we get some research going. Ideally, if we did research, it would be nice if we had a random controlled trial. And then ideally, it would be great if we could evaluate that for more than just 12 months. So this is my last slide here. Demand seems to exist, according to Peter Matthews. Very plausible. Those are very low numbers that I think they came up with. I think it's probably more than 30. But do we have the infrastructure here besides the will, which you will talk about today, right, Carol? If you have the will, then you've got to have the means to do this. And two separate questions are, can we identify high utilizers? Now, Becky Gross is probably saying, yes, we can. Could we identify medically sensitive conditions? Well, I think the literature is saying, yeah, for those out there who are chronically homeless with HIV/AIDS, we're pretty safe saying that. For others, we don't know, but we may have some thoughts about that. So I'll just leave it at that and see if there's any quick questions. I'm at my half hour. I don't want to leave time for Rob and Rob. Yes?
For a complicated question, I'd be involved in developing supportive
hear that the goal was not necessarily to produce great cost savings
Or
or,
was something, yeah, because we didn't count them in the hospital.
okay, but the goal was for them to live and die with dignity. Okay. All right. Any other comments, surprises to all this? All right, then I think I'm going to, question here.
Did they include anything in these studies on a reduction of suicide rates?
No, they didn't. That's an interesting, outcome, but I didn't see any notion of, I'll take your name and I'll see in the meantime whether I can find something in the study that talk about suicide rates. Yes.
With working with the homeless, a lot of them have food stamps. So are you able to go to DSHS? I mean, they will tell them that they are homeless.
Yeah, thank you, Wes.
You know,
Could
as
you
far as
repeat that?
getting statistics on homelessness, going to DSHS for food stamps, also through healthcare. You know, they actually, not all of them are, but you could at least get those two lists and then cross-reference and find out.
Well, I just wonder whether there's anybody here from the county who can address that whole notion of tracking, identifying, that sort of thing. The point was made that people who are homeless use food stamps, and would not DSHS or the agency that's administering those food stamps be able to help the community out tracking outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's a county question. Yeah, I don't know if there's someone here from DSHS, but we don't, I work for the county, and we don't have.
Just another alternative to get data.
Right. Well,
Also for Apple Healthcare, they know that people are homeless because they don't have an address.
right. Well, I think that will be a challenge, as I said, but I hope it's something we want to tackle as a community to get to the point where that will be an issue. Yes.
I think that was pretty much the same question. How do you plan on getting more accurate data for tracking the homeless? Because that was extremely low. I mean, of the 43, 12 of them don't need any time. So
Yeah.
Right. So, who heads up the point-in-time count in the Tri-Cities? I mean, somebody can respond to that. I mean, it's tricky.
sorry, I was just wondering what's the plan to get more accurate numbers next year? Because of the 43 I talked about, they were shelter homeless, 12 of them.
Yeah, again, it's a snapshot, it's thing to say. There's certainly flaws with the point in time count, depending on weather. People are resourceful, and so when there's snow on the ground, they're not necessarily outside. So we have a great group of volunteers that go out and canvass the county.
Is there a certain time frame we have to do this? I mean, my thought process is that we do this, a couple times.
We don't have a say in when we do it. We do it one time a year, and we're both that data.
I think it was 197 shelters and 55 more unsheltered.
Right.
I think that there was the children in the shelter, and then
Okay. I can help with that next year.
Okay, I think maybe we can circle back and have some of this conversation at the end. But is it Rhonda or Rob who's next? Okay. I'd like to introduce my fellow Spokaneite, Rob McCann. Rob's done a fantastic job. I can just put in my 2 bits worth for this issue in Spokane. And if you haven't been to Spokane recently, maybe you're going to invite them to come, Rob. But there's some really wonderful things to take a peek at. You want the PowerPoint? Sure.
So I'm Rob McCann. I'm with Catholic Charities, Eastern Washington. I want to start by just explaining who we are and what we do. We cover everything from the Oregon border to the Canadian border on the east side of the state. But in the Tri-Cities, we only have Pasco. Brian and his shop have Kennewick and Richland. And so everything I'm talking about is Eastern Washington. But we have lots of programs at Catholic Charities. We have mental health, immigration. We have senior services. We have emergency assistance, 1,300 units of housing. We have multiple homeless shelters. We have programs that are taking kids, reuniting with their families after they lose them to CPS. Lots of different programs. But the one I'm going to talk about today is homelessness and housing. The reason we do this work, and it's important to hear this part, we believe every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. If that's true, everyone deserves basic dignity. The good news in cafeterias, we don't care what religion people are. We serve everybody of every faith tradition, and we just believe that everyone's made in the image of God. It doesn't matter to us. If your God is Christ or Yahweh or Buddha or Allah, it doesn't matter. Everything's good with us as long as you're about human dignity. And that's the crux of this argument. Homelessness is a very controversial argument. People in this room are going to disagree with some of the stuff I have to say today. And if you don't, you should find people that disagree with me, because they're going to be the ones that are going to need to come to a dialogue about this. And it's important to have a dialogue, and it's okay to disagree. I think that's an important thing to remember today. The first thing I'll talk about, what's the reality of the homeless population? For me, I'm going to talk about what I see in Spokane, but we also see in other communities in Eastern Washington. Some of this will ring true with you. Some of it may have some additions. In Spokane, what I'm going to talk about today are chronic street homeless individuals. So I'm not going to talk about kids, I'm not going to talk about families. I'm going to talk about the guy you see pushing a shopping cart, the person you see carrying a backpack with everything they own in it, the person you see with a tarp or a tent. Those are the homeless that I'm going to talk about today. The population, my homeless shelter staff will say, I would say 85% or so are dual diagnosed mental health and substance abuse. My homeless shelter staff get mad at me when I say that, because they say it's 95%, and it's not 85%. The homeless population has changed. I started at cafeterias 19 years ago, and back then in the House of Charity, the homeless person was the old guy riding the rails, chronic inebriate, basically docile, basically quiet, basically invisible. That is no longer the homeless population in Spokane. In the House of Charity, our homeless people are in their 20s. They're opioid addicted. They're the first generation of homeless people born and raised on violent video games, violent movies, and violent TV. Their answer to most things can often be violence. That's a new change in the 20 years I've been at cafeterias. But that's the reality of the homeless population. I can't say enough about the opioid epidemic. You've probably seen that down here as well. But this is the population that we're serving in our homeless shelters, and this is the population that we're serving in the housing that I'm going to tell you about today. It's important to note also we are a zero demand shelter, and we're housing first, which means we take anybody in any condition. In Spokane, the only place that takes anybody in any condition is us, at House of Charity, and the jail. That's it. So we are taking people who are actively using, actively off their meds, as long as they respect the staff and the facility and the rules, we let them come in. And so that's going to come in later when I talk about why people are going to disagree with this, because that's a big part of that. But the homeless population is very fragile. They're very, very medically vulnerable. The idea that homeless people are in the community and utilizing, we're going to talk about that a little bit, because it's a big piece of this. Solving homelessness versus ending homelessness. We're not going to end homelessness. There's a spoiler alert. We're not going to end it. As I'm having this conversation today, someone is becoming newly homeless. Someone's getting out of jail and they have no place to go. Someone's getting kicked out of an apartment. Someone's lost their job. Someone else has run out their last possible couch surfing spot, and now they're moving into their car. Someone else, they've been in their car, now the car is broken down or towed away. Someone's going to be becoming homeless. We can't end it, but we can solve it, and that's a different thing. Solving homelessness, in our opinion, at cafeterias, is every human person should sleep, eat, and go to the bathroom indoors, period. That solves homelessness. So in Spokane, that means you got to have a shelter system, and then once you're in the shelter system, you have to have a clear path to some kind of permanent housing. And that's going to be permanent supportive housing, which you just heard a lot about, and I'm going to talk about as well. You can solve homelessness. Now in LA, I don't know how you do that, I'm not going to lie. You can solve it in Spokane, and the numbers are smaller in the Tri-Cities, so you can certainly solve it in the Tri-Cities. We just about solved it in Spokane the last 2 winters, because we had 24/7 sheltering funded by the city at the House of Charity, a building that was designed to sleep 109 men only. We started sleeping up to 400 men, women, couples, and their animals. The good news was, no one slept on the streets in Spokane the last 2 winters. The bad news was, it was a nightmare for the House of Charity, and for our block, and for our neighbors. And neighbors are important, because businesses are important. And businesses that we're going to talk about today as one of the areas you have to be mindful of and respectful of. But we had no one sleeping on the streets. So that was good news. The bad news was the House of Charity looked a lot like Eastern State Hospital and the jail for having a Woodstock festival. And it scared people. Homelessness scares people. The optics of homelessness are really tough. These are individuals that look scary, they sound scary, they act scary. And the average Spokane person drives by that and says, I'm not comfortable with that. They don't understand the human value of every human being the same way that maybe some in this room do. But it's a scary thing. And it scares business owners. It scares them about tourism and retail and restaurants and hotels and all those things that are important to economic development. And so it's important to see the optics of that, because the reality of this population and solving it versus ending it, I think you can solve it. I think that it's a very difficult population. So you have to have some very, very clear rules about how you're going to do this in a safe way. There's a reason why there are not a lot of organizations opening shelters like the House of Charity or building housing like what I'm going to talk about today. Because most boards of directors of most nonprofits say, you're going to do what? With that population, they're going to end us up on the front page of the paper. Someone's going to get killed if you do that. And the reality is that risk is there. And that's why a lot of organizations don't serve this population in a low barrier, housing first kind of model. That low barrier shelter is hugely important. I think you have to have that step in any community. If you want to move people into housing, you have to have some kind of place to even quasi-stabilize people who are mentally ill, who are addicted, who are medically complicated. You need to have some kind of shelter bed where they can shower and sleep and eat and have some kind of rest from life on the streets in order to get them ready to be even thinking about housing. Now, you don't have to have a shelter, but it's a lot easier if you do. We do take the guy who's pushing the shopping cart in downtown Spokane on a Tuesday, and we will put him in an apartment on a Wednesday. You can do that, and it will work, but it's a lot harder when maybe that person has been in the shelter for a few nights or a few weeks or even a few months. It's better to have that shelter system because you can case manage people, you can prepare them. A lot of people who've never lived in an apartment, never lived indoors in their whole life, they're going to need some work to get them stable enough to be able to say, here's your key, here's your apartment, your rent is $0, you can live here forever. You think that most people will say, yeah, I'll sign me up for that. But actually, most people have some tough times with that. And then they instantly lose their housing because of that behavior. So the shelter is important. I think you really need to look at having some kind of drop-in shelter, some kind of emergency warming center shelter before you get into a lot of building, a lot of shelter, a lot of permanent supportive housing. Housing first, I want to talk about the projects. You're going to see pictures of all of these in a few minutes, but I want to talk about first how you build these. And actually, Brian Ketchum can give this talk much better than me because he used tax credits. And people want to know, well, how are you building all these buildings? We built our first, what we call Father Bach Haven, which is 50 units of chronically homeless housing for individuals, permanently supportive housing in Spokane in 2012. We're now, as I'm standing here today, building Father Bach Haven 8 and 9. All of those are at least 50 units. The way we build them is using tax credits. The way tax credits work, and they're available here down in the Tri-Cities, as they are anywhere in the country, in a very basic, quick way, high net worth individuals and big institutional banks make so much money, right, that they have to buy tax breaks from the federal government. And so the way this works is that, and I like to think, we don't know who the tax credit investors are, if they're individuals, but high net worth individuals, it's who you're thinking. It's celebrities, rock stars, and athletes, tech billionaires, hedge fund managers. All these people make so much money, they want to buy some tax breaks from the government. So what they do, and I like to think Beyonce built all of our houses. So Beyonce, I say, Beyonce, I need $10 million to build Father Bach Haven, 50 units for chronically homeless. And what we say to her is, if you give me the $10 million, I never have to give it back to you. It's not a loan. It's a free and clear grant. For 16 years, Beyonce is going to get a tax break from Uncle Sam. Now, Beyonce's accountant is sitting there with a calculator going, oh, that's a good deal. You're actually going to make more money if you just give her $10 million. And so through big banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America and RBC, these high net worth people invest their money, they buy tax credits from each state as a tax credit commission, and then we get the money to build the bricks and mortar of the apartment complex, and then they get a tax break for 16 years. Everybody wins. I don't have to ask any donor for any dollars. Sometimes you have to have some gap funding. We use the Housing Trust Fund for that. We use some local sources for that. But the vast majority of these projects get built with tax credits. So I don't have to go after any donor money. I don't have to do any of that stuff. I get the money I need to build it. We agree to run it for 16 years as homeless housing, which we were going to do anyway. Cafeterias, we have buildings that are 60 years old. So that's not a problem for us. And in exchange, on the 16th year, the investor, Beyonce, she goes away. She gets out of the deal. Now we own the asset free and clear, fully. And then we keep operating it as housing. And actually, on the 16th years, you can recapitalize it, which means we set up a new company called Father Bothaven II. We sell the building to ourselves. We keep the building, we do a renovation of the building, and we operate it for another 16 years. And we take those millions of dollars that we just made by selling the building to ourselves, and we put it in an endowment that pays for services. And that's a big part of this, because although you can get the money from tax credits to build these buildings, no one's going to give you a whole lot of money to operate them. And you have to guarantee the federal government that you will operate them for 16 years. And if you just have a maintenance person and a property manager on site, be ready for the police to be at your property all the time. It will be the Wild West. In fact, when we built the first Father Bothaven, the mayor, the chief of police in Spokane said, Rob, don't you dare build that building. You're going to have homicides, you're going to have drug deals, you're going to have police there all the time, it's going to be terrible. And so we said, well, we'll build one, and if it's terrible, we won't build it. We built one, and it went fine, because we had services on site. And now, what we get mostly from the city is how many can you build and how fast. And so, because it doesn't cost any money to the city, in fact, as we're going to talk about, it's going to save them some money. But the services on site are absolutely important. You have to have that. What we do is we build these buildings, and there's 4 floors of apartments. On the ground floor, we have about 15 offices, common area spaces, big rooms like this one that we're in today. And what we do is that's where we put services. So we have mental health counselors on site, substance abuse counselors on site, community health workers. We have Providence ER docs who come and visit and do wellness checks. We have nursing students. We have all kinds of volunteers. We have social workers from a variety of agencies. We give any agency in Spokane an office for free. So Frontier Behavioral Health puts a person in our building. And some of the local substance abuse counselors who have our 50 residents as their clients put someone in the building. And so then you now have what we call the precious presence, which is a bunch of people in that building whose only job it is to make sure those 50 people do not go off the rails. And if they start to go off the rails, they're right there to help them with whatever they need. And remember, these are 50 people who are mostly mentally ill, mostly substance addicted in some way or another. Most of them are both. We had a guy, Father Bothaven, his entire apartment is covered wall to ceiling with tinfoil. He believes the government is listening to his thoughts when he sleeps. So if he has tinfoil up, he's fine. If the tinfoil comes down, you have about 2 hours before he's going to be engaged by law enforcement and end up arrested. So what do? It's crazy. We give him tinfoil. Give him lots of tinfoil. We hide tinfoil under the couch in the lobby where only he knows it's there. So if it's 2 in the morning and he needs tinfoil, he knows where to get it. That's the kind of resident we have in these apartment complexes. You have to have a lot of staff there to make sure it works, and no one is going to pay you to have that staff. Now, there are some options that are coming around now with the Medicaid waiver and with local city continuum of care money and sometimes county money that will help you put some of the staff, some of the case management staff in these buildings, and that's important. But the more staff you can have, the better the precious presence in terms of all these definitely usually medical staff people that are supporting the 50 people that live in this apartment. And you bring in as many as you can. And lately at cafeterias, we've now brought in the really big guns. We've brought in the retired nuns. So we have these 80-year-old nuns who come into these buildings. They only have one job. They go to the community kitchen. They bake chocolate cookies. They go door to door. They knock, knock, knock. Would you like a cookie? Who the hell is going to say no to a nun with a cookie? Nobody. But what Sister Mirda is really doing there is she's peeking in the unit. And she's making sure, okay, is he bathing? Does he change his clothes? Does he have 7 people couch surfing on his floor? Is he hoarding? Does he have stolen bike parts in his unit? And then she goes downstairs and reports to the case manager. Hey, Joe in 202, he needs some help. He's getting off the rails. The idea being keep them in that housing at all costs. We call success in our housing if someone comes from a shelter or the street, chronically street homeless person, they're still in stable housing. 2 years later, that's success. And we're averaging around the 80% success rate in our chronically street homeless housing projects. And that's the only way you get that is by having that precious presence. I want to talk a little bit about the issues because this is where the controversy is going to start coming. And this is my last slide. I just have pictures after this, so don't worry. The math of this stuff is amazing. It's $3,200 a night to be in the hospital. It's $140 a night to be in jail. It's $11.22 cost per unit per night to be in house, charity, and shelter. The average Spokane chronic street super utilizer spends anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 per year per person on police, fire, hospital, ER, jail, social service costs, court costs, all of it. Or for about $9,000 a year, we can put it in Father Bothaven. And what's a better deal for the taxpayer? for the community, for the police department, for the fire department. It's a better deal to have them housed. The idea that permanent supportive housing, it's going to save your community money. We've seen that in Spokane. I think the hospitals and the fire department and the police department will tell you that. I know in Spokane, the fire department, about 80% of their calls are medical, and about half of those are homeless people. We had a guy who went to the ER 62 times in 1 year. We put him in Father Bochaven. The next year, he went twice. Well, you know who loves that? Providence Hospital loves that. But you know who else loves that? Every time you call 911 in Spokane, they roll a police car, a fire truck, and an ambulance. And if you're up on the South Hill in Spokane and your husband or wife's having a heart attack, you want the ambulance there in 3 minutes, not 13 minutes, because they're on their 10th call of the day at House Charity, which happens all the time. So in terms of utilizing services, it is better if people are housed, but this is housing first, which means people are living in these apartments and they are still using, they are still drinking, they are still maybe actively off their meds. It's the classic thing of wet housing, which as soon as you say that, is everyone getting 10 eyes up. It becomes a very political issue. The reality is every apartment in Pasco and Tri-Cities right now is already wet housing. Every one of them. If you want to go live in the nicest apartment in Kennewick and drink yourself silly inside your unit, you can do that as long as you pay your rent and don't make a disturbance. You probably get away with it, so you end up dead. The same thing is true in our homeless housing projects. It is housing first. We take anybody in any condition. A lot of people have a lot of problems with that. It becomes one of the lightning rod issues. Are you enabling people? Are you, and I get this all the time, even at the House of Charity, they say, Rob, you're taking in someone who's drinking and using drugs, and they have 3 hots and a cot at the House of Charity. You're just making it worse for them. They're never going to be clean sober. And the truth is, the answer to that question is yes, we are enabling them. We're enabling their human dignity. But we are indeed enabling, because some people will not stop using and not stop drinking. We know that. But the reality is it's better if they're housed or sheltered than if they're on the street. They're going to cost less. They're going to have less quality of life crimes in your downtown, and it's going to be better for their dignity. But that's a big issue, because some people will tell you they don't deserve that apartment. They don't deserve that shelter bed because they're not trying to fix themselves. Now that becomes a moral judgment. We believe every human being is made in the image and likeness of God, including the one that can't stop drinking. And that person, or the one that can't stop shooting up heroin. Those people also need the dignity of a bed and an apartment. But it's a tough crowd to put in your shelter. It's a tough crowd to put in your housing. And if you put them in there without any services, it will go off the rails very quickly. So we have lots of security. We have lots of cameras. We have lots of that precious presence. But that's not the only issue that gets people fired up. The big one we also get is, Rob, you're attracting homeless people. The food is so good at the House of Charity, and the word is out that there's so many free apartments that are coming from Alabama and Texas and Florida and everywhere in between. And I've been hearing this for years, from my own big donors, from my own Catholic priests, from elected officials, you name it. People are deathly afraid of this. And so we started using data a couple years ago at House of Charity, a couple times a year, in front of the lunch line, where we serve 500 people a day. We ask them 2 questions. Where were you born? And how long, if you weren't born, how long have you lived in Spokane? 85% were born within 75 miles of downtown Spokane. The ones that weren't have been here on average 16.1 years. So these are our people. But really, it doesn't matter. If we found out tomorrow that they were all from Alabama, you know, my response would be, so what? We don't care whether you're from Spokane or Syracuse or Syria. If you're a human being, you get a bed, you get a meal, you get a shower. That's the reality. But this issue really gets people upset. If you're attracting homeless people, business owners get very upset about that. Tourism, your local group of Chamber of Commerce, they get very upset that you might be spending your money on someone else's homeless person. That's an issue that has to be talked about, because you have to have respect for every human person, including the business owners, including your Chamber of Commerce, including your police department, including all these people that will be afraid of homeless folks, that will be afraid that you're attracting homeless folks. I've been on the board of Providence for the better part of the last decade, and I can guarantee you when they thought about building the Children's Hospital in Spokane, they never once sat around a conference room table and said, wait, we shouldn't build a state-of-the-art children's hospital. We might attract more kids with cancer. They never said that. But we talk that way about the homeless. God forbid we attract more of those people. We have a Catholic social teaching answer to that, but it's not everyone's answer, and that's okay. Because some people are going to be very upset when they think that other cities are busing their homeless to your city. And that's why you see so many homeless in Spokane all of a sudden, or Pasco, or wherever. That idea that this whole population is lawless is another pervasive theme. The vilification and criminalization of the homeless is huge. They must be criminals. They must be the one that broke into my car at the mall. They must be the ones that are causing all these crimes in downtown Spokane. We have rules in our housing and in our shelter. If you do crimes against people or property, we don't serve you, or we will evict you. But that's not the perception. The perception is, oh my God, those housing projects that Catholic Charities keeps building, they're full of criminals. They're full of all these awful, lawless people. But the reality is there is a group of very lawless individuals that embed themselves and attach themselves to the homeless population. They want to sell them drugs. They want to human traffic them. They want to do all kinds of things. They want to wait till the first of the month when they get their check and then wait for them under the underpass and beat them up to take their money or take their prescriptions. There is a group of criminal element that surrounds itself inside this homeless population. It's a very small percentage, and we would love for them to get arrested. In fact, we give video clips and names to the Spokane Police Department on a regular basis saying, please arrest this person. He's a drug dealer. He keeps beating up our clients. He's the one that's stealing bikes all over Spokane or breaking windows and taking purses out of cars at the mall. And he's not coming into our shelter. He doesn't live in our housing, but he hangs around with this group because they're easy prey. And so then the whole community says the whole homeless population must be lawless. And that also focuses into the next piece, which is NIMBYism. It's really hard to build these properties without all of your neighbors. As soon as you find out that Catholic Charities is building something there, they line up to sue you or stop you or injunct you. So you have to find the dirt that's already zoned correctly. You have to make sure that you have a good case to make and that you respect local businesses and neighbors. The truth is, I would not want one of these projects next door to my house. That's a true statement. That's why we build them downtown, near services, near mental health, near substance abuse, near all the things that these people need who are very fragile and very vulnerable. But you have to take that into consideration when you're opening a shelter or when you're building this housing, because the community will become very afraid. And that's when you need your key partners. The key partners, if you're going to do a shelter or if you're going to build housing, first and foremost is the police department. They are the absolute key partner. We've had a great relationship with the police department and all the communities that we built these in. And in fact, we won't build one unless we know we have a good relationship with that police department. They have to be on board. They have to be okay with this. Most are, but not all of them. And that's okay. To have that dialogue and have that discussion with your local chief of police and with the officers. Because if you don't have that police support, fire department support, this becomes really hard to do. If you don't have the mayor and the city council on board, this becomes really hard to do. There's a lot of ways to block these projects, and once they're open, there's a lot of ways to shine bad spotlights on them. If you have a fire department or a police department or elected officials who don't really want them. So you have to have that dialogue before you start thinking about building for this population. The other key partners, healthcare, the faith community, all your local churches, the media, how the media does stories on this can have a huge impact on whether or not this is going to work in the Tri-Cities. And that's an important part of this. You know, at the end of the day, these are lightning rod issues, but there are good answers to most of them, but they're not perfect answers. And it's okay that people are afraid you're attracting homelessness. It's okay that people think, well, you're enabling these folks. And it's okay that people think, well, I'm a little bit scared of this. I don't know if I really want this in my community. You have to entertain that voice and bring them to the table and talk to those people. Because if you try and build and open these programs without that voice being part of it, they will come up once you're up and running, and they can really be disastrous. Especially if they're influential people, if they're big business owners, you have to get them in the table first. And that's a huge part of this, and a big part of this. I'm just going to scroll through for a couple seconds. Here's our main shelter in Spokane, 109 beds. We've slept a lot more than that over the years. It's been going for 60 years. Slow demand. We take anyone in any condition. St. Margaret shelters for women and children. I didn't talk a lot today about homeless families. That's a whole other conversation. What I'm talking about today is mostly chronic street homeless folks, but we do have a shelter for families as well. This is a program out at the convent at Holy Names where we have families who are getting their kids back from CPS, moving into the 80 or so nuns' quarters in the convent. And then we have lots of homeless projects. Here's Father Rockhaven, the first one we built. These are all 50 units. They're one bedrooms or studios. They're built intentionally small so that to discourage couch surfing, and they're built like tanks. It's about 1 notch above prison grade construction. The floors are concrete, and there's drains in every floor, so you can't flood the unit. It's really built to design to take hard wear and tear Cedar Haven, another 50 units. This is Father Bachhaven 3. We call them all Father Bachhaven. He's our former director, but actually, as we build these, I sell the names to rich people who want their names on the side of the building. The Marilee Apartments, another 50 units. And then we have lots of different units. Donahanson Haven, that's a new one about a year or two ago, 50 units. These are all pretty close to the House of Charity, which is another issue. People will say, hey, wait, you got a concentration of quote unquote those people. So too much of a density of those people. But you got to be close to services. A lot of our residents, although the units have kitchens, they still go to the House of Charity for their meals. But then we bring services into the building, our Precious Presence. We do life skills classes. We teach people how to do laundry. We teach people how to refrigerate and cook food. We provide food banks in every single one of the buildings because these are folks, some who have never lived indoors, much less in their own apartment ever in their adult life. For families, we have the same thing, tax credit projects, but these are homeless families. We do not put these anywhere near the homeless individual projects because homeless individuals are a lot of people who have been in and out of jail. They have extensive criminal histories. Some of them are sex offenders. We don't want them too close to children. So we build the homeless family projects in suburban areas outside of downtown Spokane. Pope Francis Haven was the first one we did those. We do them all over the Eastern Washington, so we have stuff in Colville. We do a lot of stuff in Spokane, obviously. This one we just opened a few months ago. That's 75 units of homeless family housing out at that Holy Names Convent site I was telling you about. Some of you, a lot of our homeless families moved into there. And then we do a lot of farm worker housing. In Pasco, we have 2 farm worker projects. We have one in Othello. You may have driven by Bishop Tobel Haven or Desert Haven in Othello, or Guadalupe Haven and also in Othello. Tepeyac Havens here in Pasco. These are all tax credit projects. These are all paid for by the IRS. St. Michael's Haven is homeless for veterans in Walla Walla. That's on the campus of the VA. That's homeless families who are veterans. And that's pretty much pictures of all of it. But I can't stress enough that you have to have a good dialogue about this. The Kidder-Matthews report is the first step in a tax credit housing project. We went ahead and commissioned that report. You need what's called a market study. The Kidder-Matthews report is a market study. In order to ever apply for a tax credit project, the first thing you need is a market study by an outside firm that says, yes, you can build housing in Pasco or Richland or Kennewick. And there are enough homeless people to fill 50 units, which we know that there are. I agree the point-in-time count is really problematic. I wouldn't rely too much on it. And if we build in Pasco, it would be Catholic Charities, Eastern Washington do it. If it's in Kennewick or Richland, it would be Brian and his crew that would do it. Either way works. We work a lot together. And it really has to be a community decision when you want to build one of these projects. And I'm sure my time must be up by now. So I'm going to have to watch it because I'll keep going otherwise.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, questions? Yep.
Are there any clients, any people living that you do not take into the housing project?
Great question. The only people that we can't take, and the reason these projects work is because they have Section 8 project-based vouchers. So get to know your housing authority people, because that's a very important part of this. It's really hard to open these projects without some vouchers in them. But the Section 8 vouchers, you can't have people who manufactured that or are level 3 lifelong registry on the sex offense. But pretty much anyone else, we can find a way to make it work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How long would it take to get one of these?
From the moment you decide you want to do it to the moment you move in the first resident, it's typically about a 2-year horizon. Tax credit projects are super complicated. They take a long time to do them. You can only apply every year in December and January. And, you know, it's complicated and a lot of hoops to jump through. The application's about this thick. But it takes longer than it just, someone gave me $10 million and said, go tomorrow and build it. It'd be a lot quicker. You probably do it in 10 months.
I don't know if you said this, but did you see any improvement or change in health outcomes for the people?
We sure have in Spokane. I mean, I know the study didn't show any, but and you've got some Providence and some Cadillac people here. When you take a couple hundred chronic super utilizers off the street, you are going to spend less in your local ER and hospital. You know, the average homeless person spends about 11 nights in the hospital. URI, the average person spends about 2.1 nights. The reason is because they keep them in longer. And so there is, you will save money on healthcare costs, but you'll save money on all kinds of other taxpayer costs as well. We've started to try to measure that. It's really hard to measure because you got to get the hospital on board and the jails and the police department, and everyone's got lawyers and there's HIPAA, hard to share information. You have to get waivers, everyone to sign. Super hard to do, but it is trackable. And we have seen a lower spend in Spokane for all kinds of things that are taxpayer related and healthcare related.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are you willing to come down and help us put this together? That's something.
Yeah, I've talked about that with some of you in this room. That's why we did the market study. Is we would like to, if the community wants it, build one of these in Pasco. And if it's Kennewick and Richland, it would be Brian. I'm not a betting man, but I would bet that we're going to end up building this in Pasco. But I don't know. That's up to the community.
So each of the individuals that are residing in these have Section 8 vouchers?
Most of them, it's better if they do. Now, you can build these without vouchers. We've done a couple of those, but it's much more financially stressful if you do that. The Housing Authority in Spokane, every time we announce we're building another 50-unit building, they give us a letter that guarantees us at least 40 vouchers. But not every housing authority does that. In Walla Walla, we got 0 vouchers. But it's better if they have them.
So you get a guarantee of, or in most of them, you get a guarantee of Section 8 vouchers that come with that. And so is that how you're able to pull people off the street?
Yeah, that's how you pay for it. You need money you need each of those apartments to throw some kind of rental revenue. And homeless people, they're typically paying nothing. And so the Section 8 vouchers make up for that revenue. There are some other sources that can help with rent payments and with rental revenues, but you need money to have a property manager and a maintenance person and keep the lights on and all that stuff.
Right. So that keeps them. Because one of the things that we run into here when in my office, so we'll run into people that we think would be great for a particular program that has Section 8 voucher attached to it, but there's always if they don't have a voucher, then if they're on the list, it's difficult to get them from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So with the 40, does that bypass the list?
No, we still have to use coordinated entry in Spokane. We don't get to pick who goes in these units. I wish we could, but we use coordinated entry, and then you have to meet the definitions of chronic homelessness, which you already heard about, and then you're eligible to move into that apartment. The Section 8 just pays us the money each month for rent. We do take some people that don't have any vouchers, and we find other funding sources, but we do use coordinated entry, and I think most communities the local city's going to want you to use that. And I think a whole other talk about coordinated entry. I won't go into that now. There's pluses and minuses to that too, but the vouchers make it a lot easier. It's not impossible to do without vouchers, but it's sure as heck a lot easier to have.
So how do you fund the services? Is that just contract individual organizations, or how do you do that?
A couple different ways. First is you provide those free offices to anyone who wants to use them. And there's, if you're the mental health, especially, mental health organizations get paid based on a lot of things, one of which is their no-show rate. You can eliminate your no-show rate for these types of people if you just knock on their door and say it's time for your appointment. And that's what's happened in Spokane. So we offer free offices to people, and so we have other organizations providing services. We also use continuum of care money. There are some grant streams out there that will help pay for case managers. The Medicaid waiver, we're really hopeful, is going to start paying for a lot of the staff at these properties. And then the other way we pay for them is every time we build one of these, we make about $800,000 in developer fees. Sometimes it's over $1 million. We take that money, we put it in the endowment at Catholic Charities, and 4% of that a year comes off, and that's how we pay to have that precious presence in these buildings. That's all the staff. But when you open it up to the whole community and say to your local hospitals, your local other social service agencies, how would you like a free office in the lobby of Father Bacchus 10 in Pasco, people will come, and they will provide services to your residents at no charge to you. They just want the free office. Yeah, I think you've been waiting.
So if they have any kind of convictions, felonies?
We'll still take them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless drug related.
Unless you manufactured meth, that's the only thing that exempts you, I think, from a Section 8 voucher. To someone from the housing authority.
Depends on the housing authority.
And the sexual?
Most of our residents have extensive criminal histories. Extensive. Yep.
So once you get the individuals into these houses, I'm assuming with the wraparound services, you work to get them trained on just basic living, how to do laundry, how to care for themselves, how to do a budget. Is it your end goal to eventually get them moved on to another type of living situation, bring somebody else to do it?
Yes, for some, that's the end goal. There's actually a new funding program called Move On, which is a national program that helps get some of the homeless people out of this housing into other regular Catholic Charities housing, so we free up that bed for another homeless person. A lot of these people in these 50 units are unemployed. That's the reality. So that's the first thing, is the idea that we're going to get them all a job. That's not really true. A very small percentage maybe will get some kind of a job, but most are really unemployable. If you end up at House of Charity, your addiction, your mental health is so profound already that you're likely not employable. Now, some people throw the curve on that and we can get their jobs, but not most. The other thing that happens quite a bit, and the medical professionals in the room will already probably have guessed this, we didn't expect it when we started building these, it becomes hospice for the homeless. If you're a chronic street homeless person, you're already medically complicated, you've been on the streets all these years, your adrenaline's pumping, you're in survival mode, you're self-medicated, you get to an apartment, and the first thing your body does is go, I can relax now. And the first thing that happens, they die. We've had a lot of people who pass away in their units because of their liver disease, their diabetes, their heart conditions, all these things they've had, but have been masked by self-medicating, and they actually get stable and they get much better off, and then it all catches up with them. And so a lot of these projects have become hospice for the homeless. We never expected or intended, but that's probably one of the more common ways that we open up units.
Rob, we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay, you pick them.
I just have one question. Is this a housing unit would be like the Morris House in downtown Seattle, where they have the first floor and then they assist with anybody who walks off the street?
Yeah, I don't know anything about Morris House, but these, which are working. These units are all pretty similar. They all look a lot like this. The first floor is all offices, upstairs is all the apartments. And the offices have all the services, and that's pretty common.
Betsy, get the last question.
Ground level question. To get the funding for the initial permit and the applications that have to be put into the city, is there a separate fund that we should be looking at for that?
Whoever develops the project is typically going to pay for all the pre-development costs, which is acquiring the land and getting the architect to do the first sketches and having the staff to put in all the applications. Because what if you don't get it? You might not get it. In this case, if we were to build it, we could cover all those costs. There should be no cost to do this to the city of Pasco, for instance. None, unless sometimes we get more points on the taxpayer application. We get a local grant, which is usually something small from a local city. But there should be no cost. Catholic Charities, if we build it, we would cover all those costs. But we also get all the development fees, so there's obviously something in for us too.
Can we all thank Rob for his presentation? Wanda, you're up.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Rhonda Hoff. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy CEO for Yakima Neighborhood Health Services. As I said earlier, I'm the current chair of the ACH. I'm kind of the bridge between healthcare and housing. And we, a community health center, we've been in Yakima for 40 years. And in 2004, we developed our first healthcare for the homeless project. And at that time, our board of directors added to our mission statement to end homelessness and improve quality of life in our community. Clicker here. And so that's really where we really got into the world of housing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we did that. And we are a very different model than what you just heard from Rob, because we did pretty much everything we did in partnership with other housing and social service providers in Yakima in terms of developing our needs in our project. So we have nine primary care sites in Yakima, in the Yakima Valley, ranging everywhere from Yakima down to Grandview. And then as part of that, we have also developed supportive housing, permanent supportive housing projects, many of those through scattered sites by mass releasing from private landlords. In fact, that's how we started, was working with private landlords. So just to kind of give you a concept of what we do, we saw about 24,000 unduplicated patients last year, and about 14% of those individuals were homeless. So it is a small percentage of our line of business, but sometimes it's about 90% of our time. And for those of you who work with multiple populations, I'm sure that probably resonates with you. We do primary care services, and in the right, on the items that right, we're also a HEN provider with coordinated access points in Yakima County, both in our Yakima and Sunnyside offices. We also provide medical respite care, which is recuperative care for homeless individuals who are sick, but not sick enough to be in the hospital, and for those that are being discharged from the hospital and need a place to recuperate. And then in addition to that, last year we had about 50 units of permanent supportive housing, and we're opening a new unit. We opened a new unit last week that I'll be talking about here in just a minute. So how we got into the housing world. First of all, when we started our Healthcare for the Homeless project, the first thing we did was we developed a very robust outreach team, which included a nurse, a behavioral health specialist, a case manager, who was going out into the alleys down by the river, the Greenway, and Yakima, to try to look for those individuals that were not coming in to receive health care. They were going to the emergency rooms instead of coming into the clinic. So the team became very successful. Primary care providers turned around and said, if you want us to make a difference in the lives of these people, you need to put a roof over their heads. You need to help them find housing. At the same time, our continuum of care had some things happening with it. Our largest provider of housing shelters, the organization, they had 5 housing projects, one of which was a shelter. And then we also had another HUD McKinney provider that said they no longer wanted to provide HUD McKinney housing. It's expensive and you can never make it pay for itself. If anybody here is a HUD McKinney provider, you know that that's a very difficult thing to do. So you can't just be a sole HUD McKinney provider without supplementing it by other means. And so those 3 things happened, and at the same time, there was a need for medical respite care. We have a board member who on a quarterly basis goes out into the community, meets with our residents who are of the homeless community, and asks them how we're doing, what services they need, and what services that are not being provided. And the very first focus group that he attended, they said, we need a place to be when we're sick. And so that was our charge as staff to develop the medical respite program. And so that's sort of how we got into the housing. The organization that dissolved had 2 supportive housing projects that were designated for medically fragile people. And so the continuum came to us and said, you're the health provider, could you take on this project? And that was our first project that we inherited, with 2 housing programs specifically for the medically fragile. So in Yakima County, what has been happening, and these are our important time counts over the last year, is we've lost our capacity for permanent supportive housing units, and at the same time, our unsheltered unit numbers have gone up. Now, one of the comments that have been coming out and talking about is point in time count that happens the 4th week in January across the country, because nationally we're trying to get an unduplicated count. But HUD says for everyone you count, there's probably another at least 2 that you don't count. So there is a recognition that this is just a sample, that everyone knows that this is not a real count. So we typically multiply this number by 3. And as an indicator, the definition that Patrick gave before is the federal HUD definition. In Health and Human Services, the definition is a little different. It also includes people who double up, which HUD does not consider part of homeless. But as an indicator, we counted last year in 2018, 228 unduplicated, unsheltered homeless individuals in Yakima County. And when we look at that in our healthcare for homeless number, we triple that, and that pretty much matches up with what we saw across the year in healthcare. And so that sort of makes sense what HUD says. If you count 1, there's probably another 2 at least that you're missing. So this is one of the things that we're going through right now, is trying to identify what our needs are. We're doing a housing assessment in Yakima County between, do we need to add more shelters, do we need more permanent supportive housing? But we have, for the last few years, been investing a lot of our local dollars in more shelter beds. And this is our director of our homeless network put together this slide that says, what is it that matters and where should we be going? And it's kind of a model, but it talks about what causes homelessness. There are income crises, there are health crises, and there are family crises. And then how do we respond? We have prevention, we have rapid rehousing, which means basically somebody finds themselves homeless, then you want to respond as quickly as possible with the least amount of help as possible to help them get back on their feet, and then get them into safe, affordable housing. And so then through this, then you identify a need for prevention and shelter and housing, but then you still have some folks that are left out in the cold for a variety of reasons. And the few folks that we do have some emergency shelters in Yakima, but sometimes there are safety issues that they can't be there. There are sanctions, they can't be there, and there are capacity issues because our shelters get built. And so how do we respond with, we find we have less dollars for prevention, less dollars for supportive housing, and we end up building more shelters. And this is what we've been going through the last couple of years in Yakima is we're putting more and more dollars into shelter, and we still have less housing. And so we've been struggling with this for the last few years in Yakima. So back in 2011, along with our partners, we had developed a model of a consistent and a standard case management model for supportive housing. Along with us, Triumph Treatment Services, the YWCA is our domestic violence partner. The Housing Authority is a huge partner of ours. Building Changes and the Washington Family Fund has been a supportive service provider of ours. Our county government, and then again, private landlords, because housing stock is very precious in Yakima County. But we developed some shared learnings around trauma-informed care, housing first, and harm reduction, and then developed some standardized systems across the county so that wherever the client entered the system, that we could expect some certain assessments to be done. And the Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary of Planning and Evaluation evaluated us as a promising practice because of the standards of getting people into services and being able to work with them to develop some housing stability plans. So within our systems, we have, and this is primarily our community health center with the partnerships. We start, as I mentioned, with the continuum of care in our coordinated entry system. We have our outreach teams. We have the HEN and ABD programs. I'm assuming most folks are familiar with HEN and ABD, which is a short-term disability program that we get a lot of our referrals from, because this is where, and again, I should have said, I'm talking primarily about the chronically homeless as well as Rob was. We also have programs for homeless youth and families, but I'm really focusing on the chronically homeless today. We're a health home provider, which is another important part is when you're thinking about how to provide these support services. If you're a health home provider, then you can do a lot of care coordination, because a lot of these folks are very medically complex and qualify for health home. And then we are a supportive housing and supportive employment program with provided with AmeriGroup. We jumped on that immediately last year when they started on. We have a couple of hundred of our clients that are eligible, not all of them are in our housing units, but we provide supportive housing and employment through that program as well. And then we also have a SAMHSA grant that is focused specifically on those who have substance use disorders and co-occurring disorders, trying to screen them, motivate them to choose to go into treatment, and then find stable housing for them either before or after they go into treatment. We don't really care the order. And then again, the heart of what we're doing is to improve their health scores and their health outcomes at the center. And the slide on the right talks about our resource center at Neighborhood Health Services that kind of tries to tie all together the wraparound services that our clients need, or the clients of the partners that we work with. So Triple Aim, so this is kind of my mantra: drink the Kool-Aid, housing is healthcare. And I am, disclaimer, I'm on the board of the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, so that's not just my disclaimer, but 10 years ago, the Institute of Health Improvement came out with the Triple Aim, and there are several outcomes that are directly related to healthcare and housing, and this is one of the ways that we measure. I'm not a researcher like Patrick, but the way that we are tying what we're doing and trying to improve our health outcomes, and these are small. So a few of them that just say improving the rates of successful connection to primary care, increasing the rate of compliance with care plans, improving chronic disease measures, reducing communicable disease, reduction in behavioral health crises, medication management, obtaining and maintaining employment or education, and greater success for recovering SUD. One of our partners, Triumph Treatment Services, is a CD provider. They were one of the first CD providers in the area to start providing housing because they were being very successful treating patients, but then when they came out of treatment, they didn't have a place, a clean and sober place to have them. So our supportive housing criteria, which is very health focused, again, these tie back to our definition through our coordinated entry. So these are our priorities that we serve in the chronically homeless. They should be medically fragile as determined by PRISM scores, which is a Medicaid predictive modeling score that says basically if an average Medicaid beneficiary has a score or a cost value of 1, then a PRISM score of a 1.5 or greater means somebody's using the system 1.5 times more or 150% more than the average patient. So they have a score for that. It's equal to the health home scores. So we're looking for basically people who are pretty sick. They do need to be capable of ADL, and if they have a diagnosis of mental health, SUD, or co-occurring disorders, and also if our staff, who know a lot of these folks in our community very well, who have been living on the street, have additional assessment information about those, then we will consider that as well. We do take them off of the coordinated entry screen as well. Our medical respite program has some similar criteria, but similar but a little different because it is very limited. This is really focusing on people who need a place to recuperate. So they need to have an acute medical condition that can either be improved or stabilized in a short period of time. They are living on the streets or in emergency shelters, again, capable of ADL. They should be continent. We don't take any patients with IV lines, and they need to be able to administer their own medications. We're not a licensed facility. So last year in our medical respite program, we had 72 patients who stayed for an average of a little over 1,400 days. And you can see here why they came in. Everything from fluid cellulitis to gunshot wounds. We're starting to have more and more of our patients come in for induction in our medication-assisted treatment program. And so that's starting to cause a bigger capacity issue. Because our providers are taking more and more patients in our MAT program, and so we're now looking at trying to double up some of those patients as roommates that are going through the induction, and so we'll see how that goes. So last year, between those two programs, in housing, in our permanent supportive housing, we had 123 different participants for an average length of stay of about 1.5 years each, both those that are still there and those that were there and left during the year. In housing, 73% who left for some other kind of permanent housing, most of those fair market housing. So those are a great success story. 6% of them died in the housing program, and 20% of them returned to homelessness. I was going to say mostly by choice, but I would have to say that's not true. Some of them, I think most of them were evicted for violence and threatening behaviors. In our medical respite program, we had 72 patients, average length of stay just under 20 days. 20% of them only left for permanent supportive housing. We do ask the primary care provider to determine the discharge for that when they're ready, when their acute illness has been stabilized. 3% of those patients died while they were in the respite program, and 69% returned to homelessness. This goes back to the issue that we put so much of our local filing fee, document recording fee dollars into emergency shelter, that we have an encampment and a shelter, but we don't have any. We have not added any supportive housing. So that is very unfortunate. Our respite program is very closely aligned to our community health center. In fact, one of our satellites is a block away from the respite program. Respite program typically is overseen by a nurse and behavioral health specialist, and then their responsibility is to get the patients into either their primary care provider, the dentist, and behavioral health staff, or into their specialty care, whatever the discharge instructions are from their primary care provider or the hospital discharge plan. Okay, so in housing, so this talks about our newest project, and our developer that helped us with our newest project was the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing, who works with organizations statewide. Marty Miller is the director of that program, and I was at a hearing listening to him a couple of weeks ago on the topic of H-2A worker housing. I don't know if that's an issue around here, but in Yakima it's a really big issue. And Marty made the comment, he says, everybody loves our office. Everybody loves us until they pick a site on where they're going to put their next housing project. And that was really very true of our latest housing project. But as you can see here, we have housing programs for individuals, for families, for young adults, and then our medical respite program. We've inherited programs, we've bought programs, we've leased programs, and then the most recent project that we're just opening up now is a building rehab project. So we had an issue of siting, and as I think Rob mentioned earlier, one of the things that we knew that's important to do is you have to put your site where clients can get access to services. This is not housing, this is supportive housing. And so we had identified a location, and with Orf's help, had identified, there were 2 or 3 locations we were looking at, but through their help had identified sort of where the services are that they were currently using, where the medical services are, legal services, all of the other services, and it was just off the downtown corridor. We started this project in 2013, and last week we opened it. So our project was 6 years, but it involved lots and lots of zoning discussions and hearings and neighborhood meetings, and you just have to have a lot of fortitude. But if it's the right thing and you've got the right partners, it's all doable. So if you know Yakima, this is the corner of Walnut and 6th Street, just off of, 2 blocks off of Yakima Avenue. This was an old IGA grocery store. It was built in 1940. On the left, that's before, and on the right, it's after. And last week, literally, we started moving individuals in there. So 22 units, 37 individuals, 6 units are dedicated to families, and 3 units dedicated for veterans. On the inside, this is what it looks like. They are called dwelling units. We wanted to maximize the space, so each color is a different sort of like pod, and then each pod, and so each pod, an individual has his or her own room, but then there is a shared kitchen and a shared restroom. And then, so this is the family room up here. So this is a central visitors area and family area, but the private areas where only the residents have access to are around and back here. And then we have offices. Our case managers have offices up here as well. And then our partner organizations, whether it's Comprehensive Health Care or Entrust, which is the public supported employment group, other organizations can come and meet with our clients here as well. We have a resident manager that's there 24/7. We also have security there, and then laundry facilities there as well. Okay, so a couple of the outcomes on our residents, go back to the Kool-Aid and back to our providers' request on helping them make a difference. So just a few of the outcomes that we saw last year. So before we get there, one of the things, because we're a housing provider and a community health center, community health centers report every year what's called the Uniform Data System, UDS. Every community health center in the country reports on these. And there's some crossover between the HMIS system and UDS and ICD-10. So what we do is we take our HMIS number and we put it into our electronic health record system so that we can see how we're doing with our residents in public housing compared to the rest of our population. So the first one that we talked about was increasing access to care. And so this is looking at our general population. So the far on the left is our 24,000 patients that we saw last year. Our general homeless population, which we saw about 3,200 unduplicated homeless individuals last year, and PSH is our permanent supportive housing population, and then over here, respite is the far on the right. So we're looking, our goal is to have the health outcomes of our residents in permanent supportive housing be at least as good as our general population. So our health, in terms of health coverage, we had 77% of our residents, our permanent supportive housing folks, had insurance compared to 73% of our general population. And then we also look at visits per user. And in our universal population, we saw 3.9 visits per patient in our universal population. When you look at our permanent supportive housing, that's over 35 visits. That's really a representative of case management, where we have a lot of contact with these folks. And getting them into care, if our providers are trying to find a patient, they know how to get a hold of a case manager to get them. Likewise, when we look at just medical visits, here, right there. just medical visits per user. So this is showing that in our universal population, it's 2.2 visits for our general population, and then in our permanent supportive housing, over 6 visits of medical visits for our permanent supportive housing residents, over 8 per resident. Improvements in chronic disease, we're looking at controlling diabetes and hypertension. These are our biggest diagnoses among our general population. So in our permanent supportive housing, 92% of our diabetics had their diabetes controlled by the end of the year last year. We can send our nutritionists there, we can bring the clients into the clinic to see our patients. And then in hypertension, likewise, we're not doing as well with our hypertension and supportive housing, but we can at least do how we're measuring those. And then communicable disease is a good one that we're looking at. Here we're measuring flu vaccine. We had a hard time with everybody last year on flu vaccine. I don't know if that was just us, but we just really struggled with our general population. Our respite patients, we did an exceptional job on, but our residents in supportive housing were close to our universal population. And then, of course, mental health is a big issue. We had almost half of our patients in supportive housing had at least one mental health diagnosis, compared to 30%. But the ability to reduce the crisis level by having our behavioral health specialists involved was critical to the success of the patients having fewer crises. We also incorporate our housing and services into our electronic health records. And so this is just a picture of showing how you can integrate this so that the providers and the outreach team are really being able to communicate. This is actually one of our NHE patients showing that the diagnoses of homelessness and opioid dependence, depressive disorder, Dr. Pedrosa is our chief medical officer, but they're all communicating with each other on what is needed for this particular patient. It has really helped in the communication a great deal. So this is what we did in foundational community supports last year. And this is the supportive housing and supportive employment programs that came with the Medicaid waiver that Amerigroup is the third-party administrator of. Average age was 42. We served 38% of our clients were literally homeless. 25% of them were already in supportive housing programs, and 35% of them were housed. Many of them came from Penn referrals, and other items that they needed help with were things like bus passes and transportation, care coordination, and hygiene tasks. And the most qualifying factors were adults that 2 or more stays in an adult residential care setting, meaning they had been there and then left and then had to go back in. They had high prison scores, they were homeless, and then for supportive employment, that there was disruptive behavior or previous terminations with mental health issues. So this is a sample of the costs that are different in medical respite care. We look at the Washington State hospital pricing, average charges for a depression stay or a rehab stay compared to an average respite stay in our respite program. So this has been very helpful because we've had some of our health plans that have been helping us pay for the respite program because of the cost savings of having folks not have to go to the hospital in the first place or not have to return to the hospital. And then again, where the patients came from. These are patients, or one of the outcomes that we look for at respite is when people leave us, when they leave the respite program, is we do a 30-day look back in the EDI system, which is the Emergency Department Information Exchange, and it tells us if somebody's been to a hospital anywhere in the state of Washington, and so we look to see if any of them have gone to a hospital after they left us. And 71% of the folks that we had in respite last year did not. There's some studies that say that homeless individuals that have the option of respite are 50% less likely to go to a hospital after they leave respite than if they did not have respite available. So this is a quick story about Bob. Bob was one of our elderly individuals that was dropped off in front of our resource center at 2 o'clock in the morning last year, one morning. With a hip, he was in a hip recovery situation, and he has been gone to the hospital 8 times during the course of this 6-month period before we were able to put him into the respite program. And we kept him there for 48 days before we were eventually able to help him get into facility. But Bob had racked up $37,000 of inpatient rehab stay before he was just left the hospital. $4,800 in ER stays, and then compared to what it cost us to have him arrested for those 48 days before he went into his new home. And then finally, this is a story that came out years ago, but it's so telling to me about permanent supportive housing. This was in the New Yorker, and this is a story about a man named $1 Million Murray. Many of you may know this story. But it was about a chronic alcoholic who was living on the streets of Reno for 10 years. And during the course of that 10 years, he racked up an average of $100,000 a year in EMS costs. Police and fire picking him up, the legal court costs, the emergency room costs. And the police chief finally said, let's do something for Murray. Let's try to figure out a better solution than responding to him like this all the time. So they put him into a permanent supportive housing unit, and the cost went down significantly, dramatically. And his quote was, it cost us $1 million not to do something about Murray. That was the police chief. So, we update this every year. Our average cost per chronically homeless individual in our organization is about $13,000 a year. That's for a one-bedroom at Fair Market Housing in Yakima, plus a case manager's time, and our case management ratio is about 1 to 10. And this is in a master lease arrangement. So it's for us, it's very cost effective, much more cost effective to have somebody in permanent supportive housing. The national average for having somebody on the streets is $40,000. That's a national number that has been measured year after year by the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and they average about $40,000 a year to leave someone on the street. So we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And our philosophy in Yakima around harm reduction and housing first is that participants say no today, but yes, they might say yes tomorrow to wanting to work on housing stability and treatments. Trauma-informed care and motivational interviewing works, but it takes time. And around supportive employment, as we're working with them, housing stability, disability benefits, sometimes work wins. We've got a couple of clients that have been appealing their disability for years, and this last year they found out that they were eligible for their disability appeal, and they said, no, thank you, I've got a job now and I like it. So we've got stories about that. And then we've had families reunified successfully as housing stability and health improves.
Great. Thank you.
For the purposes of getting everybody out on time and to give Lisa some time to talk about AmeriGroup and the Medicaid waiver, I will let Lisa go. And then if any of you want to stay and remain, we can probably answer some questions after that. Otherwise, please stay for us. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Bourne, and I'm with AmeriGroup. And we are the third-party administrator for the Foundational Community Support Program. So, as you all know, AmeriGroup is also one of the MCOs in Washington State, but MCO in Washington, Managed Care Organization. I'm so bad at the acronyms, thank you. So we are wearing a separate hat as the third-party administrator for this program. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to say FCS, Foundational Community Support, just because that isn't a real big mouthful. So I'll just be talking about the FCS program. I'll give you a little overview about what the program is. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but HCA and CMS, Healthcare Authority, and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have a 5-year agreement to have a Medicaid transformation program. So that's what the FCS program is, and we have about 3 years left. So it goes until December 2021. And as you can see, these are targeted Medicaid benefits. So folks who are eligible are able to receive supportive housing services and supportive employment services through Medicaid. So helping them obtain and maintain employment and housing. Those are the core services that they're able to receive through this program. And it isn't an entitlement. That means that people need to qualify for the SPS program in order to receive these services. And we'll talk about the eligibility real quick. Also, it isn't ongoing payment, and it isn't wages or wage enhancement. So it's not the tangible thing. Think of it as the services, the support services, case manager's time. That's what the SPS program covers. So as you can see, there are a lot of different entities that are working together to have the SPS program up and running. So as I mentioned, Healthcare Authority and CMS have an agreement, and the DBHR, Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, and ALSA, Aging and Long-Term Support Administration, the acronym. So our state agency partners for this program. So we work really closely with both DBHR and ALSA in implementing the SPS program. They're providing a lot of technical support to the SPS providers, fidelity models, that sort of thing. And then, as you all know, AmeriGroup is the third-party administrator for the program. And I'll talk a little bit about our role. And then we also are contracting with a number of different agencies and organizations who are the ones that provide the services all throughout Washington State. So, we heard from Catholic Charities, YNHS. There's two of our SPS providers for this program. So we have community-based organizations, we have healthcare providers, behavioral health agencies, we have tribal providers, also aging and long-term. We have long-term services and support providers. So it's a real variety of organizations and providers for the SPS program. So what benefits can someone receive through SPS? As I mentioned, the core services are supported employment and supported housing. So supported employment services help someone find the right work right now. So as soon as someone says that they're ready to work, they are able to receive these services to help them get a job that's right for them when they're ready. So there isn't, any tests or anything that they need to prove that they're ready to work. If someone's ready, it's about helping them get a job. So it's, for example, an employment specialist would work with a client, completing employment assessments, doing planning with them, interview prep, building relationships with potential employers on that individual client's behalf. And then once someone has a job, helping them maintain that employment as well. So that's the really amazing piece, is that maintaining, not just the achieving part. And then similarly for supportive housing services, housing case manager or specialist to work with someone to complete a housing assessment, build those relationships out in the community, identify potential landlords, help that individual navigate the housing system, what funding sources might be available, helping them actually apply for housing, and then once they're housed, continuing to provide education, training, and coaching with any, disputes come up, roommate issues, working through that with that individual. So who's eligible to receive the SPS benefits? So there's really 4 main criteria that we're looking for here. So first of all, since this is a Medicaid benefit, people need to be enrolled in Medicaid. So that's the first piece. They also need to meet the requirements for complex needs. And this is broken down into 2 pieces. So there's the health needs and there's a risk factor. So basically for the medical necessity that's related to mental health, substance use disorder, activities of daily living, or complex physical health needs that prevent someone from functioning successfully or living independently. And we'll talk about the risk factors, and I'll give you some examples of those here in just a second. And then finally, we need to meet the age restrictions. So for supportive housing services, it's 18 or older. For employment, it's 16 or older. And that's really to capture the youth in transition. One thing I'll say is we have a quick, we call it a quick reference guide, and it's a 3-page document that outlines this eligibility criteria. It's available on our website, which I have the link in here, so you'll see, and then I did bring some printouts too, so if anyone's interested in that, I have that available. So I mentioned earlier that clients would also have to have a risk factor. So these are examples of what a risk factor would be. They only need to have one risk factor to be eligible for the SPS program. So for supportive housing, that could be frequent or lengthy homelessness, and we already talked about this, but it's the HUD definition of homelessness. So consecutive for 12 months or on 4 separate occasions that total up to 3 years, or excuse me, that total up to 12 months in the past 3 years. Frequent or lengthy stays in an institutional setting. So that could be a skilled nursing facility, inpatient hospital, correctional facility, or frequent stays in an adult residential care setting, frequent turnover of in-home caregivers, or the PRISM risk score of 1.5 or above, which Ron talked about a little bit. And that's in the state system where it's measuring how much someone utilizes services. So for supported employment, examples of risk factors are if someone's enrolled in HEN or ADE, if they have difficulty obtaining or maintaining employment due to physical or mental impairment or TBI, or if they have substance use disorder with a history of multiple treatments or diagnosed mental health or SUD requiring continued treatment. So again, they just need one risk factor. So AmeriGroup's role as a third-party administrator, we cover a few different key pieces. First of all, we have been really busy building the provider network across Washington State. So the contract was finalized just before Christmas of 2017, and the program launched January 2nd of 18. So it was a really, really quick turnaround time. And we had a number of providers who got contracted and credentialed with us really quickly, and we were able to get the program up and going. We there was a lot of building the plane as we're flying it moment. But we have 96 contracted providers across Washington State, and I'll show you a breakdown of the provider sites here in a minute. We're also in charge of sending out the service authorizations to all of our providers. So what that means is that when we receive referrals from our contracted providers, using what we call an assessment form, we look and determine the eligibility based on that assessment form. And if they're eligible for the SPS program, we send the service authorization to the provider. If they're not, then we send a denial notification to the provider. And then all of our providers submit claims directly to AmeriGroup, and we pay them for the services that they provide to individuals who are involved in the SPS program. And then we submit all the encounter tracking and reporting to the healthcare authority on a very regular basis. And we're also tasked with measuring outcomes and quality improvements, so our providers submit monthly reports to us that we compile, send out to HCA, and we're also building a sustainability plan. So the goal is a demonstration project, and we have a little less than 3 years left. Our hope is at the end of December 2021, this will be able to become a permanent Medicaid benefit. And if that's the case, it will be rolled out to all the managed care organizations to implement. So we have more than 3,300 people enrolled in the FCS program statewide so far. And you can kind of see it's broken out by region here. SE stands for supported employment, SH is for supportive housing, and then SE and SH are those individuals who are enrolled for both employment and housing services. And then here is our provider network. As I mentioned, we have 96 contracted providers, and we're still working on growing that. The grand total that you see of 292, those are the provider sites. So, for example, Catholic Charities has multiple sites. They're one contracted provider with multiple service locations. So that's where this multiple sites come in. So anyone can refer an individual to the FCS program. There's lots of folks in the room who I know are contracted providers, Consistent Care, Comprehensive Health Care, I heard, Catholic Charities, Yakima Neighborhood Health Services. So there's also many of you who aren't contracted providers or would never become a contracted provider. So it's really important for you all to understand how you might be able to get connected with the FCS program still. So one of the really great things about this program is the state really wanted to have a no wrong door approach to receiving referrals. So we at AmeriGroup receive referrals every day over the phone from individuals who've heard about the program, family members, friends, calling on behalf of individuals, referring them to receive services. Our providers refer folks, and our state agency partners, DVHR, and also refer a lot of individuals as well. And I already mentioned a quick reference guide that's a helpful tool to determine who's eligible for the FCS program. So it'll be good to kind of familiarize yourselves with that to make sure that you're making strong referrals and understanding who meets the eligibility criteria for FCS. And then we have a referral form, which is just a one-page document. It's pretty simple. And we're looking for the client's information and then the referring party's information. And that can be downloaded from our provider website, which I have a link in here as well. I'm not going to go over that because it's really short in time. So here are the reimbursement rates for the FCS program. So for supported employment, it's in 15-minute increments. So 1 unit is reimbursed at $25 per unit. And there's a limit of 120 units or 30 service hours in an authorization period. And each authorization period is 6 months. So every time we receive a referral via one of our providers with an assessment form, let's say that individual is deemed eligible for the FCS program and we get them enrolled, their authorization period starts from the date that's on the assessment, so the provider can bill for the time spent completing that assessment form, and it's set for 180 days out from that date, so 6 months. So it's always a 6-month authorization for every single person who's enrolled in the FCS program. And so for supported employment, there's 120 units or 30 hours of employment services they can receive in that 6-month period. And for supported housing, it's a little bit different. It's a daily rate. So it's $105 per diem. So every single day of service, you're providing supportive housing services to a client, you would bill AmeriGroup $105. And there's a limit of 30 days of service in that same 6-month authorization period. So it has the idea that you're providing 1 hour or 60 minutes of supportive housing services before you're billing that per diem. We understand that sometimes you're working with that client less than 60 minutes, and then you're working with them more. It's still a per diem daily rate of $105. So the idea is for these two to be comparable with 30 hours of employment and 30 days of housing services in that 6-month period. $105 per unit for housing, and supported employment again is $25 a unit, which is 15 minutes. So if you worked with a client for an hour, that'd be 40 units at $100. And the great thing about this is if a client needs those support services to maintain their employment or maintain their housing, there's an unlimited number of reauthorizations for that individual. So if it was not for these services, they would be at risk of losing their housing or losing their job. Then they can continue to receive an unlimited number of reauthorizations. And then there is a process called exception to the rule, where if a provider needs more than the standard number of units in that 6-month period, there's a process for them to request additional units. Okay, so this just gives an example of what the reimbursement projection would be annually. So this is with a 1 to 20 caseload ratio. So if for supportive housing, if you have 20 SPS participants and 2 authorizations, so 6 months and 6 months, so in a year, and 30 days of services at $105 per day per unit, that'd be $126,000 annually. I also wanted to mention how you can go about becoming a contracted provider. For those of you who might be interested in that, we are still expanding our provider network, especially with supportive housing providers. We had a big push. We had a lot more employment providers sign up initially, and we've been really working hard to grow our supportive housing provider network. So please reach out to us if you're interested. These are 3 pieces that will be required to eventually become credentialed and contracted with AmeriGroup as an SPS provider. But because lots of our providers are really new to becoming a Medicaid billing provider, we're doing a lot of guiding and helping with how to get a Medicaid ID or how to get a national provider identifier. So let us know if you're interested in that.
Yeah. Your client serves, we have to be a building, and we also work with 30 minutes, their housing and children. We need some of that support housing services, and you can work with use this as a way to get more support to provide those services to your own clientele.
Yep. Yeah. So a lot of our providers have identified, like once they become our contracted provider, they've identified which clients they have that they're working with who might be eligible for the SPS program. And then they can be referred. So providers fill out what we call an assessment form and send that to us, and that's what we use to determine eligibility. I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not quite sure.
And does the person
there's a bit of flexibility around that, and it kind of depends on the agency. The details of that are in our provider manual for this program, which is available on their website. That's something that I usually like to talk to individual
when you're bringing providers in to administer, how many providers do you bring into a community? What's the community size? How many providers?
So that's not something, what we're doing when we're building this provider network is initially the state healthcare authority, NDHR, ALTSA, all these different state agency partners kind of came together and identified different organizations who are already providing support housing, support employment services in different communities. So we've basically been contacting with those as many as we can get, as many organizations who are interested.
So if you have multiple providers in the community, how are you determining the referral process? So is it you're just taking turns going down the list, or?
Yeah, we're not at a point where we have too many providers to divvy them out. We're more on the other side where we have too many referrals and not enough providers accepting external referrals. So we haven't had an issue with that, but yes, if we got to that point, then yeah, it's number one is client choice. So if there's any provider preference indicated by a client or the referral source, that's where it goes. After that, it's based on the location, what's closest to that individual. And then after that, it's based on their outcome and capacity report that providers send to us.
I'll ask you afterwards, because I'm in a fairly small community with 3 providers for it. So part of what any organization who's going to begin to do the service is going to want is that there's enough clientele that helps to support that case manager doing that work. So I'll ask you.
Okay.
Hey, thank you very much, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out, I think you're going to share this, but here are some contacts to DHR and ALTSA who are state agency partners and can provide a lot of guidance around fidelity and evidence-based models. And then here is our provider website that I referenced a lot. And as I mentioned, you can download the quick reference guide, the referral form, and our provider manual from that website.
Thank you. Yeah. I wish we would have more time to answer all your questions. Wanda, I'm sure there are people that would like to talk to you after the meeting, but we really don't have a lot of time to talk about the next steps. What we tried to do, though, today was to give you enough information to give you hope that inspired you to say, we can do this in our community. So I guess, just from a show of hands, how many of you think that we could build permanent supported housing in our community? Okay. Because this is what it's going to take in order to do it. We are all going to have to come together. And I think for the for expediency, we will put together a follow-up survey regarding our next steps. But I think that we have some great information that we will make available on our website. We have Rob's presentation, Rod's presentation, and Lisa's presentation, and Patrick's presentation that you can access following this meeting. And then I think probably the next step will be to put together a list and a series of questions of what we do from here. Now, we do have a steering committee, and I failed to name all the people on the steering committee. So if you're on that steering committee, stand up. So in case you know any of these individuals and you want to get in contact with them, Dana, Barb, Mark, Dan, Kendra, Diane, our staff. So if you want to belong to the steering committee, that will be one of the questions, because I think it's going to take all of us putting our heads together to move forward with this project. I would ask Rob or Rhonda if you have any words of wisdom to give to us before we go into this mode. No words of wisdom?
It's doable. You can do it.
Okay, I think we can do it. I think we have the capacity to do it, but understanding how to do it is going to be, I think, the devil's always in the details, right? So thank you again so much for giving us the time away from your work today. I hope you found this worthwhile. Yes? Okay, thank you very much.